Hi everyone, and welcome back to Cardiac Ready for Teens. For those of you who don't know, I'm Bia, and Cardiac Ready for Teens is a place where teens can get together with other teens and talk about spiritist teachings and what spiritism really is. For many of us, when a parent tries to lecture us, or an adult we know tries to lecture us, or we're reading a long, complicated book, it's so hard for us to truly understand the meaning, or we just get bored and zone out half the time. So hopefully, talking to teens and putting it in our own language and making it simpler will help me and the rest of you guys to learn it as well. And I am learning along with all of you. I'm not just a know-it-all. I don't know everything. I go and I study through this and then I talk about it so we can all understand it together, but I am learning so much just preparing all this. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. Speaking about being grateful, I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving and ate lots of turkey and mashed potatoes and stuffing or whatever else you eat on Thanksgiving. In case we ate too much food on Thanksgiving to even remember, we left off on chapter 3, on the last part of chapter 3 of the Spirits book, and we're getting into the habit of reading the Spirits book together week by week and digging it apart and slowly looking at pieces of it to make sure we understand it, because if we understand it now, we'll be able to learn even more later instead of learning the basics now, the basics later. And I know when school comes around, everyone has a busy schedule and it gets really crazy to just sit down and read a book sometimes. So hopefully taking it little pieces by pieces, it makes it bearable when we're only doing it once a week. So once again, we left off on question 59. And all the questions in this book, they have a pattern of, it's a question that was asked by Allan Kardec to the spirits. So there's the question that was asked, and then there's what the spirits answered, and sometimes there's an addition that Allan Kardec wrote in himself, and one of them's italics and one of them is a smaller font so you can tell when you're looking at the book. But this question 59, it's actually in a different layout. Although all the other questions are in that layout, this one's in a little different. So it's not exactly a question per se, but it's just the spirits kind of ranting on and on about a certain topic. And so we'll just take each paragraph little by little and break it apart and just see what it says, but it's all from the spirits themselves. So this part is called Biblical Considerations, an account concerning the creation, because if we remember, chapter 3 is about the creation. So then 59, the first paragraph. Cultures have held widely different ideas about creation, according to their degree of understanding. With the support of science, reason has recognized the improbability of some of these theories. However, the one given by the spirits confirms the opinion long acknowledged by more enlightened individuals. So here they're saying that throughout history there's been so many people that have different ideas, so many different beliefs on how everything was created. And they're saying that the one given by the spirits, it's adding up. Like, no one really has a real good counter to it. They don't really know how to say, oh no, that's wrong. The objection to such a theory is that it seems to contradict the sacred text, but a serious examination will lead to the realization that this contradiction is more apparent than real, and it results from the way an allegorical meaning is interpreted. So here they're saying that one way people say, oh no, it can't be right. What the spirits think can't be right, because it contradicts the sacred text, the Bible, and everything that these people were following. It goes against that. So how can that be true if it's going against what the Bible says? But it says, when you seriously look at it, and you look at it not for word what it's saying, but for the meaning, if we take that meaning from an old lesson and put it into modern day, we'll see that it does relate, and it does add up to what the spirits are saying. Then they continue. The issue of the first man, personified in Adam, as being the exclusive progenitor of humankind, is not the only religious belief that has had to be modified. At one time, the movement of the earth around the sun appeared so contrary to the scriptures that all kinds of persecutions were carried out under such a pretext. Nevertheless, The earth continued to move despite the anomithia, and no one today would dispute it without insulting reason itself. So here they're saying that one example of how we had to change a little bit of what was first thought and what was said in the Bible was the issue of the first man. So people said that Adam was the first man, and from him became all the human race. But the spirits, as we already heard in previous questions, they kind of counterfeit that. They said he wasn't the first one. But so then they say, but that's not the first time that we had to change something. Just like how people didn't believe that that the earth goes around the sun, and that people thought that the earth was at the center of everything. So for them, when you said that the earth was just a little ball going around the sun, they were like, oh, that can't be true. So, and then once we learned it was true, we modified that. So we have to modify as we learn more things, as things become more modern and more present in today. We learn new ways and we're interpreting it differently. So although it may not be exactly what we're matching up to exactly what we're saying today, it's how we interpret the lessons and what we got from it. Then it continues. The Bible also tells us that the world was created in 6 days, and it established the time of its creation at about 4,000 years before the Christian era. Before then, the earth did not exist at all. It was created out of nothing. It is a solemn text, yet physical science, indoxable science, has proven the contrary. Earth's formation is undeniably written in the fossil records, and it has proven that the 6 days of creation represent successive periods, each lasting perhaps maybe hundreds of or thousands of years. This is not a theory, a doctrine, or an isolated opinion. It is a fact, as solid as the movement of the earth around the sun, a fact that theologians can no longer refuse to accept, and it demonstrates the error that one can fall into by attributing literal truth and often figurative language. Should we thus conclude the Bible is in error? No. Rather, people err in the way they interpret it. So here they're bringing up another point that the Bible says that we kind of go against, it would seem. So the Bible says that the world was created in 6 days, and that this would be about 4,000 years before Christ, before the Christian era, and that the earth was just created out of nothing. But now, even real scientific facts show us that that can't be true, because these fossils are hundreds of thousands, there's millions of years old. So how can that possibly be if it's only a couple thousand years old? So then it says, they're not saying that the Bible is completely wrong, that everything it said was wrong, but it's saying that these days that they were saying, these 6 days, they probably represent hundreds or thousands of years. Because on other planets, how can we assume that they count days the way we do? So there 6 days, that was just for a theory, for when people had simpler brains and they didn't understand as much and they didn't have as much science and knowledge, then 6 days made sense to them. But now that we know so much more, we realize that these 6 days may be 6 periods of thousands and thousands of years. And at the end here, it's saying that no, the Bible isn't in error, but it's just people learning how to interpret it. If you don't see it as a literal truth, but as a figure of language. So when they talk about 6 days, we don't think literally 6 24-hour days, but we think, okay, 6 periods of time, and the periods of time were long that they were created. So it's just a way of interpreting it. It's not that the Bible's wrong, but it's just if you're looking at it literally, like the people back in the day did, or if you're looking at it figuratively and more modern. In excavating Earth's archives, science has discovered that order in which different living beings have appeared on Earth's surface, and this order is in agreement with the one indicated in Genesis. The difference, however, is that instead of having issued miraculously from the hand of God in only a few hours, the work of creation did indeed occur according to God's will, but through the laws of natural force over millions of years. But does that make God any less great and powerful? Is the sublimity of God's work lost because it did not appear instantly? Of course not. We would have to have a petty idea about the divinity not to recognize the divine impotence in an eternal law established to govern the world. Far from diminishing the divine world, science shows it is to us under a more magnificent aspect that better confronts to our notions of God's power and majestic precisely because the work was done without disregard for the laws of nature. So some things that are in the Bible and some things that science are discovering do match up. Like they were saying that science has discovered what order living beings came, and that's the same way that the Genesis put them. So they do line up, but the difference, there's still a difference, is that how God created it. If he created it in a few hours, or if it took him a long time, it took millions of years and forces of nature. And what they're saying is, it doesn't make God any less powerful if he created it in thousands of years, because he is still all-powerful and created that, because none of us could, no matter how many years we took, we could never create everything that he did. So it doesn't make him any less powerful for creating it in millions of years. And it also is showing that he's brilliant because he's following laws of nature. He's not just creating it out of thin air. He's making these laws of nature and setting rules for the whole entire world. And then it continues. Science places humankind last in the order of the creation of living beings, and it's taming with the Mosaic records of this point. However, that record puts the universal flood at 1,654 years after the Earth's creation, whereas geology shows us that this great catalysm occurred before humankind ever appeared. So far, no traces have been found in the primitive layers that would assent to the presence of humans or of animals, which, from a physical standpoint, at least, would have been of the same category. However, nothing has actually proven this to be impossible. Since many discoveries have already raised questions about this issue, it is possible that at any moment the material certainty of the anteriority of the human race may come to light. In that case, as well as in others, the biblical text would be shown to portray an allegory. The actual issue lies in determining whether or not the geological catalysm was the same one as that of Noah's story. We know that the time needed to form the fossil layers did not allow any confusion. Therefore, as soon as a vestige of human existence prior to the great catastrophe are found, it will be proven either that Adam was not the first man, or that his creation had been lost in the night of time. There is no arguing against facts, and it would have been accepted in the same way as the movement of the earth and the 6 days of creation. So here they're giving just another way that the Bible and what we're talking about now goes together and also doesn't. So they're saying that there was supposed to be a great geological catastrophe, and just like Noah's Ark story, how there was a huge flood and it wiped out everything. So they're kind of saying like this, if that happened, but if it only happened 1,000 or so years ago, how come we don't have fossils of it, or how did the human race start again? And there's all these questions, but we see it more as, so science can't prove that it happened. They can't find that yet, but they're saying that this again is another way that we must look at it in a way of something to, it's figurative language. It's something for us to learn from, not something that exactly happened. And in the past, when people were more ignorant, they didn't have as much science, they didn't know, they believed that the earth was the center and the sun moved around the earth, and that the everything was created in 6 days. So they believed these things back then, but now with upcoming science, we can see that maybe that's not exactly what happened, but it was just the message, the point of the story that's trying to get across. And then it continues. The existence of the human race prior to the geological flood is no doubt still hypothetical, but consider the following. affirming that humans first appeared on Earth 4,000 years BC, if any of them except for a single family were wiped out 1,650 years ago, 50 years later, then the entire current population of the Earth must have originated from the time of Noah, i.e., 2,350 years BC. However, when the Hebrews migrated to Egypt in the 18th century BC, they found decile populations and highly civilized lands. History also shows that at the same time India and many other lands were flourishing as well, and this fact does not take into account the chronological table of certain cultures that go back even further. Thus, it would have been necessary for the descendants of a single individual family to have populated from the 24th century to the 18th century, i.e. 600 years, all the vast regions that have been known about at the time, supposing that others had not been populated. It would also have been necessary for the human race during this brief period to have evolved from its primitive state of total ignorance to the highest degree of intellectual development. Both superstitions are in contradiction to all anthropological laws. So here they're elaborating again on how this doesn't really add up to modern day, because if there was this great flood and no one survived except for one family, then in the span of 600 years, that one family would have to have reproduced and created all of these other civilizations. Not just all these other people, but these big, massive civilizations that were functioning. So how would that happen? And if that happened in a brief period of time, they would also have to been so much evolved to create all that in so little time. So they're saying, how could that have really happened? Then it continues. Human race diversity supports this contradiction. Climate and custom undoubtedly produces modifications in physical characters, and these modifications can only be carried so far, and psychologically examinations prove that the existence among some races of constitutional differences more profound than could be produced by climate alone. The crossing of races produced intermediary types and tends to erase extreme characteristics. It does not produce these characteristics, however. It only creates varieties. Thus, for the crossing of races to have occurred, it would be necessary for there to be distinct races in the first place. But how could there have been any distinct races if they all came from one ancestor, and specifically in such a short period of time? How would anyone believe that in only a few centuries a few descendants of Noah had been transformed to the point producing the Ethiopian race, for example? Such a metamorphosis would be as likely as the theory of the common origin of wolves or sheep, apids and elephants, or birds and fish. Once more, nothing can prevail against the factual evidence. On the other hand, everything can be explained if we admit that the human existence prior to time commonly assigned to their appearance, that their origins were diverse, that Adam, who lived 6,000 years ago, populated an uninhabited region, that Noah's flood was a localized catastrophe rather than a great geological catalysm, and finally that we take into account the allegorical form characteristics of Oriental style, which can be found in all the sacred books of every culture. That is why it is prudent not to lighten accused as erroneous those doctrines which, like so many others, could some day enjoy a retractable from individuals who currently oppose them. Rather than being lost, religious ideas become even greater when they march in step with science. This is the only way to keep them from being vulnerable to skepticism. So that was a lot, so let's break that up a little bit. So in the beginning they were saying that a contradiction to that one family populated the whole world in 600 years. It's the human race diversity, because we have different races, different temperature zones, need different skin types and different hair and all of that. So if there's all these different races, how could we have come from one ancestor in so little time? There was no first to have interbreeding to make other races, there would have to be other races to begin with. It couldn't just come from one family. So they were just proving once again that how unlikely it was that a flood wiped out all humankind, just left to one family, and they somehow populated the whole world in 600 years in such a little time and made so many different races come out of that. But they're also saying that it could be, it's not saying that it didn't happen. Maybe it did happen. Maybe, like they were saying, Adam, he was the first man in a region. Maybe he grew up alone. Maybe he got lost from his other, where there was actual people. So he grew up in this region as the first man. And maybe Noah's flood, maybe it was like in places where there's tsunamis. The tsunami doesn't wipe out the whole world. It does devastate an area. And to that area, it's tragic, but it's not the whole world. So it could have been a localized catastrophe, and these things could have happened locally instead of actually being a worldwide thing, and that would make much more sense to the different cultures and all that, instead of starting from one family or one man. And they're saying that at the end, they're saying that it's great when the religious ideas add up to science, because then there doesn't prove room for skepticism, because it always becomes an issue when science comes out with something new, but religion believes something different, and then they contradict each other, and they're, oh, who do you believe now? So when they line up together, it's a nice way to be sure of something. And that's what they're saying. That doesn't mean it's wrong. It doesn't mean Noah's story is completely wrong, but it just means the way we interpret it is different. The way we understand things now is different. So that's officially the end of Chapter 3. And I don't want to start a completely different topic in Chapter 4 right now, so we'll save that for next week, because it's the vital principle. And in that chapter, we had the parts of organic and inorganic beings, life and death, and intelligence and instincts. But since we talk so much about that biblical aspect, I don't want to throw two topics together, so we'll save that for next week. But before we leave, I'd like to leave off with our daily message from the Daily Book of Positive Quotations by Linda Picone. For today's date, November 29th, the title is Humility. Humility is the only true wisdom by which we prepare our minds for all the possible changes of life. Being humble is not the same as lacking confidence. Humility means acknowledging that we have limits, that we need support and guidance from others, that we cannot go into it completely alone. We can have great confidence in ourselves while still understanding that it is impossible to be totally self-reliant in this complex, challenging, and rapidly changing world. If we acknowledge that we can't manage everything by ourselves, we are more likely to ask for help from others, and more likely to achieve success. I am a competent person, but I know I can't do everything myself. I will not be shy about asking for help when I need it. Hopefully we can all take what we learned today in the Spirit's book and what the daily quote just told us, and hopefully we can take that for us throughout the rest of our week as we go into December, which is exciting, Christmas time, holiday time. And if at all you guys have any questions or comments, concerns, anything at all, feel free to email me at cardiacradioforteens@gmail.com, and I'll get back to you right away. I'm Bia, and this is Cardiac Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening. This has been Cardiac Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening.